I can still smell the vanilla cake my mother baked that morning. She never cooked, not even on holidays. But for my 18th birthday, she made a cake. That alone should have told me something was off. They waited until noon. I was still in pajamas when Dad called me into the living room. He didn't meet my eyes. Mom stared at her lap, her lips a tight, pale line. The air felt different, heavier. My stomach churned with a silent warning. "Sit down," Dad said, using the same cold, clipped tone he used when I'd spilled milk as a kid. I sat, confused but composed. I had learned long ago not to show emotion around them. Feelings were landmines. One wrong step, and everything exploded. Then came the truth. "You're adopted," Mom said flatly. No emotion, no warmth. Just a line delivered like a weather report. "We took you in when you were 2. Dad added, "Your birth mother couldn't take care of you. We did what we could." I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Mom didn't pause. "We think it's time for you to find your own way. You're old enough now." Dad reached under the couch and dragged out a small gym bag, setting it down with an indifferent thud. "There's some money in there," he said. "A few clothes. We've arranged a hostel for you until you find a job." They kicked me out. On my birthday. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up slowly, nodding like a soldier accepting her fate. "Thank you," I said, even managing a slight smile. They didn't notice my fingers clutching the bag strap like a lifeline. They didn't see the flicker behind my eyes, something sharper than sadness. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that 3 weeks earlier I had found a letter. It was buried in a bottom drawer in the hallway closet, hidden beneath layers of old tax returns. The envelope was addressed to someone named Elena Vasila. Inside was my birth certificate, and on it, Elena's name, next to the word mother. I looked her up. I even went to the library and combed through brittle newspaper articles, piecing together a story no one wanted me to know. What I found haunted me. I never told anyone. Not until Elena's life fell apart, not until they took her away. And now, walking out the front door of the only home I'd ever known, I didn't feel discarded. I felt ready, because I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was leaving with a plan. The hostel smelled like bleach and stale sweat. The kind of place people end up when life stops making offers. That first night, I curled up on a thin mattress, my back pressed to the wall, my bag clutched to my chest like it held treasure. But all I had were 2 changes of clothes, a few crumpled bills, and that envelope. That envelope was everything. At dawn, I slipped out into the street. The wind was biting, my cheeks raw. I walked nearly an hour to the public library, my sanctuary. It was quiet, safe, and they had archives. I sat at a dusty microfilm machine, pulling up the same yellowed article again and again. I'd read it so many times the words burned into my mind, but it still made my breath catch every time. The article named him Dr. Richard Halverson, accused of unethical experiments and abuse on female patients at a now-defunct psychiatric clinic. He denied everything, of course. A month later, Elena was declared unstable and committed to Cerebria Noye Bereza Psychiatric Hospital. No charges were filed. The press moved on. The world forgot. Except for one man. Dr. Halverson went on to run the Halverson Health Foundation, the same foundation my adoptive father supported. I'd seen the name before, printed neatly on envelopes that came to the house, always brushed off as charity work. Now it all started to fit. I printed the article, my hands shaking. The librarian gave me a look but said nothing. Back at the hostel, I opened my notebook and began writing. Every detail, every thread I could pull. Elena had been a psychiatrist herself. She tried to expose a predator, and she paid the price. She gave birth to me during her institutionalization, and somehow I ended up with a couple tied to the very man she'd tried to bring down. That wasn't fate. That was design. That night, sleep never came. Shadows shifted on the ceiling like they had a pulse. My thoughts were loud, too loud. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Elena? Was she still alive? Did she know I existed? Did she remember? I had to find her. The next morning, I started making calls to state archives, mental health departments, anyone who might know what happened to patients after Silver Birch shut down. Most people didn't even recognize the name. But one older woman, her voice soft and cautious, hesitated when I mentioned it. She said she'd call me back in 2 hours. And she did. "There's a long-term care center in Glen Ridge, about 3 hours north," she told me. "Some patients from Silver Birch were transferred there, quietly. There's no public list, but some are still there." I didn't ask how she knew. I just wrote it down. Ridgeview Behavioral Health Center. Now I had a destination, but no car, no cash, no idea what I'd find. I didn't eat that day. Not because I wasn't hungry, because I couldn't afford to be. The crumpled bills from my foster parents had vanished into rent and printing fees. Every coin mattered now, even the ones wedged in vending machines. I sat outside the library, notebook in hand, running numbers and solving problems like they held the answers to a life I hadn't even started living. The bus fare to Glen Ridge wasn't much on paper, but to me, it might as well have been airfare to another continent. With what I had in my pocket, it felt unreachable. I didn't want to steal. I didn't want to beg. But I needed answers. Across the street from the library, a dingy diner had a flickering "Help Wanted" sign taped in the window. The kind of place where the coffee was always lukewarm and the walls smelled like burnt grease and cigarettes from a decade ago. I stared at it for a long minute. Then I crossed. Inside, I asked for the manager. He sized me up, took in the hollow eyes, the clothes I'd worn too many days in a row, the weight I carried in my silence. "I'll do dishes," I said. "Scrub floors, toilets, anything." He paused. Then, "You start tomorrow." 6 sharp. So I did. 5 days straight. No talking, no breaks. Just heat and sweat and cracked hands red from dishwater and soap. My spine ached. My knuckles bled. But I didn't care. I wasn't working for the money. I was working for the moment. On the 6th morning, I pocketed $117 in crumpled tips and wages. It was enough. The bus to Glen Ridge pulled out at 10:40 a.m. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just slipped the envelope, Elena's article, into the inside pocket of my jacket, slung my bag over my shoulder, and walked to the terminal. The ride north was quiet. The bus hummed through towns frozen in time, boarded windows, empty porches, streets still rimmed with hoarfrost even though it was already April. Places where people stopped hoping. Ridgeview loomed on a hill like a secret someone tried to forget. It didn't look like a hospital, more like an old manor that had outlived its story. The sign out front was warped and fading, letters curling away like they didn't want to be read. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and dust. The woman at the front desk didn't bother to look up. Her glasses hung low on her nose, her notepad scribbled with something no one would read. "I'm here to visit a patient," I said, steadying my voice. "Name?" she asked, without a hint of curiosity. "Elena Vasila." She blinked. That name meant something to her. I hesitated. "I'm her daughter." This time she looked at me. Really looked. She doesn't get visitors, she said softly. That's why I'm here. She picked up the phone, dialed a line, murmured something I couldn't hear, then nodded down the hall. Second door on the left. Be brief. The door creaked open like it hadn't in years, and there she was, Elena, frail. Blonde hair streaked with silver, sitting by the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't turn when I entered, didn't flinch, didn't speak, just sat in the sunlight like a painting no one had touched in a long time. Elena, I said, my voice barely more than a breath. She turned slowly. Her eyes met mine, and for a flicker of a second, something passed between us. Recognition, pain, maybe both. She didn't speak, but she didn't look away. I'm Nara, I said, stepping forward, heart racing. You had a daughter 18 years ago. They told you she was gone. They told me you were unfit, dangerous. But I read everything. I know what they did. She exhaled softly. Something in her posture shifted. Her fingers curled tight in her lap. They're still watching me, she whispered, so low it was almost imagined. They think I don't remember. I froze. Who? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward the door, then up, toward the corners of the ceiling. She didn't need to point. I knew she was looking at old camera mounts. They recorded us, she murmured. Said it was for therapy, research. But it wasn't. It was surveillance, profiling, control. Her voice trembled. I saw things, heard things I shouldn't have. She clutched her wrist like she was holding herself together. I stepped closer, my throat dry. Who were they? I asked. The Halverson Foundation, she whispered. I flinched. My father? She blinked, the name hitting her like a slap. Her lips parted, then trembled. Your father, she repeated, her voice breaking around the word. He wasn't supposed to adopt you. He wasn't even on the list. But he pulled strings, closed the file, buried your case. She swallowed. I tried to stop it, but by then they'd already decided I was inconvenient. My knees gave. I sank into the chair beside her. What did they do? I asked. What did Halverson do to those women? She bit her lip until it turned white. Experimental therapy, memory suppression, isolation tactics. It started with PTSD studies, but it went further. They tested drugs, behavioral rewiring. They needed subjects no one would miss. Her voice hollowed out. Some were addicts, some were wives who talked too much, women who didn't follow the script. I stared at her, horrified. And you? I documented everything, she said, quietly proud. I was naive. I thought the truth would be enough. I submitted a report. I thought it would matter. She smiled bitterly. A week later, I was suspended, then arrested, then transferred here. They called it a breakdown. Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. She was a woman who had taught herself not to cry, even when it burned. I begged them to let me see you. But when they told me you'd been placed, they wouldn't say where. I never stopped wondering. I reached into my bag and handed her the envelope. You don't have to wonder anymore. She took it like it might turn to ash in her hands. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, suddenly, she looked at me. Really looked. You shouldn't have come. If they find out you found me, I don't care, I cut in, my voice stronger than I expected. You're not crazy. You never were, and I'm going to prove it. Her hand lunged forward, gripped mine tight. Don't trust anyone with a badge or a lab coat, she said urgently. Not in this world. Then, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Elena stiffened. Her entire body locked into place. Her eyes emptied. Her spine straightened. A shadow passed the doorway. A moment later, The nurse stepped in, all smiles and starch. "Sorry," she said with a false cheer. "Visiting hours are over." Ella wouldn't look at me. She folded her arms tight across her chest, retreating back into the silence by the window like it was armor. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I brushed past the nurse. She leaned in slightly, her voice like a thread of smoke. "You're not the first to ask about her." I froze, but the last girl didn't come back. Before I could respond, the door shut behind me with a soft but final click. The air outside slapped me across the face, icy, thin. My breath fogged the cold. But it wasn't just the weather making me shake. My mother wasn't a patient. She was a prisoner. I didn't head to the bus station. Not yet. I found an old bench beneath a gnarled oak tree, the bark dry and split like it had been through its own war. From there, I could still see the faded sign on the hill, Ridgeview Center for Behavioral Health, watching like an old god that never blinked. Someone else had come before me, another girl asking questions, and now she was gone. The nurse hadn't said it as a threat, but it felt like one. Back in Glen Ridge, I checked into a peeling motel that smelled like mildew and loneliness, the kind of place people stayed when they didn't want to be found. The lock stuck. The wallpaper flaked. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the sunken mattress with my laptop balanced on my knees, tearing through forums, archived articles, obscure Reddit threads, anything that might hold a thread, a trace, a ghost of Ridgeview or silver birch. Missing persons, lawsuits, complaints, nothing. It was like someone had scrubbed their existence clean. So I shifted focus. The Halverson Foundation, a name that had been lodged in my brain like a splinter since I'd seen it on those donation letters in my foster father's study. The foundation's website was a masterclass in deception, polished branding, glowing testimonials, cheerful women at yoga retreats and lakeside group therapy. All smiles, all lies. I dove deeper. Nonprofit filings, tax documents, public records, and there it was, buried like a roach beneath floorboards. Thomas Brenner, signed off on a purchase order for patient care research materials. 1 year later, Silver Birch was closed for restructuring. My stomach turned to stone. Thomas Brenner wasn't just my adoptive father. He wasn't just a donor. He was in it, a director, part of the machine, maybe even one of the architects. He'd helped cover it up. And then he adopted me. I was never a gift, never a charity case. I was a symbol, a trophy, a walking reminder that they could ruin someone's life and raise their child as if justice had no memory. Rage flooded me, hot and suffocating, but underneath it slithered something colder, fear. These people had reach, power, enough to disappear lives, to erase records, to label women unstable and bury them in places like Ridgeview. The nurse, Janet. She hadn't warned me out of guilt. She'd warned me out of mercy. But I wasn't running. Not yet. I needed proof. I searched Ridgeview's records until I found her name. Janet Kell. Same name from the badge. After some digging, I found her Facebook. It was mostly pictures of a cat named Crumbs and a few half-hearted recipe shares. But buried in the comments of a nursing conference post was a clue. Still working nights at Ridgeview? Poor thing, that place is haunted. I sent a message. I didn't expect a reply, but I told her who I was, that I had spoken to Elena, that I needed help. Hours passed. Then, at 2 hours and 14 minutes, a message lit up my screen. Meet me at the back entrance. Midnight. If anyone sees you, say you're lost. That night, the wind carved right through my jacket like it didn't matter if I froze. Ridgeview under moonlight looked different. Not abandoned, not asleep, just waiting. The parking lot was a ghost town. The trees whispered things I didn't want to hear. I followed the gravel path to the back, stepping over weeds and broken stones. A rusted door marked "Maintenance" creaked open just as I raised my hand to knock. Janet Kell stood there. No scrubs this time, just a thick robe, worry lining every inch of her face. Up close, she looked worn, like someone who had stayed silent for too long and it had hollowed her out. "You came," she said, voice low. I nodded. I had to. She motioned me inside. "Keep quiet. Some of the cameras are dead, but not all of them." We moved quickly down a narrow corridor lit by flickering bulbs. The walls smelled like bleach and secrets. Through a break room, into an old storage room crowded with filing cabinets. She unlocked the third drawer with a brass key, fingers trembling slightly. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "But I saw what they did. To your mother, to the others. And when that girl came asking questions, I thought maybe this time it would matter." "What happened to her?" Janet pulled a folder from the cabinet, handed it to me like it was a bomb. "Claire Rothman, journalism major, bright, fearless. She came here asking about Elena, about the women from Silver Birch. She found court records, medical files." I opened the folder. Notes, transcripts. Claire had been so close. "She came back for a second visit," Janet said, her voice tight. "And then everything went wrong. Her dorm was broken into, laptop wiped. She told her roommate she felt like someone was watching her." She paused. 2 days later, she vanished. "Police?" "They ruled it voluntary. College girl burnout. But I don't believe that. Claire was scared, but she wasn't running." I flipped through Elena's file. The pages were riddled with red ink, delusional, unstable, paranoid, words chosen carefully, words that discredited, words that buried the truth under diagnoses. But I knew. She wasn't delusional. She was a threat, and now I was too. I stared at him, at the man who had raised me in a house built on lies, and felt nothing but fire in my chest. "You're not worried about me," I said coldly. "You're worried about what happens when people start believing me." Brenner's expression cracked for just a moment, something crawling beneath the surface. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. But he masked it quickly. "The world isn't black and white, Nara. The Halverson Foundation did what it had to do. You don't understand the sacrifices we made. I understand perfectly." My voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. "You sacrificed women. You silenced victims. And then you adopted one like a trophy." "You think you're special?" he said, voice rising. "You're not. You were saved. Given a life." "You mean a lie," I cut him off. "And I'm done living in it." He took a step closer, and for the first time in my life, I saw him for what he truly was. Not a father, not even a man, but a mask worn by power. Cold, calculated, and hollow. I stepped back. "This meeting is being recorded," I said, tapping my phone in my pocket, even though it wasn't. "Try anything, and your name goes to the press with everything else." His jaw tensed. "You've made enemies, Nara. Real ones. They won't stop." "I'm counting on it," I said, and turned my back on him for the last time. Back at Rachel's, the mood had shifted. She was watching the news, a gleam in her eye. "They're scrambling," she said. "Your leak hit all 6 outlets within the hour. Social media's exploding. A senator just called for an independent investigation into Halverson." My chest tightened with something unfamiliar, hope. But then the screen changed. A breaking news banner. "Whistleblower found dead in cabin fire. Foul play suspected." Rachel went pale. "One of the attorneys. They got to him." I sank into the couch, the horror settling in. This was far from over. It had just begun. Over the next week, the story burned like wildfire. Headlines blared, secret trials on women in recovery centers, linked to major philanthropic group. Photos of Elena, of Claire Rothman, and of Janet's hidden files spread across every platform. The foundation denied everything, but their board members started resigning. Subpoenas rolled out. Then, one morning, I received an unmarked envelope at the motel. Inside was a single page. "You've made noise. They're coming for Elena. Move her. Now no name, no return address." I bolted. Ridgeview was still operating, though under investigation. I knew they'd try to bury their evidence, including her. I called Rachel. She was already moving. That night, we posed as state investigators with falsified credentials. Hers, years out of date, but real enough to pass a sleepy night nurse. Elena was groggy when we reached her. Too many sedatives, but she recognized me. I held her hand and whispered, "We're getting you out." In the cover of darkness, we drove. Not back to the city, but north, to Canada. A small clinic Rachel trusted, no affiliations. Elena would be safe. Finally. 6 months passed. The Halverson Foundation was under federal investigation. Thomas Brenner had retired for health reasons. Ridgeview was shut down permanently. A Senate hearing was scheduled for fall, and I had been asked to testify. They'd never be able to undo what was done. Claire was still gone. So were others whose names I didn't know. But we'd cracked the mask, exposed the rot. I moved into a small apartment near the lake, got a job at a community legal aid center. Every day felt like rebuilding something that had been torn from me. Then one morning, I received a package. No name. Inside, a flash drive. A note. "There's more." Halverson wasn't the only one. I stared at it. The world hadn't changed, but neither had I. I plugged it in and started again.